Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome you all here to the Prague Monster. Sorry for the slight delay there. I had a problem getting the button to react here. Anyways, we're here today. Good morning. It's breakfast time. I've eaten mine and I'm drinking my water. I'll need that. Anytime I talk a lot, my mouth goes like the Sahara Desert. Anyways, I want to welcome you all here to the Sunday morning breakfast live. And today we're featuring the albums of Boston. Yes, Boston. They only had six. Hard to believe, eh? It's now 50 years since their first album, and they only have six. Unfortunate. I think this band could have been one of the greatest bands in the history of rock, but they just didn't put out enough material, even though that first album was brilliant. No two ways about it. Everything else after that could have been much better if they'd been able to concentrate more on the music and less on all of the hoopla that was going on around the band, for sure. So this is just basically the albums that I have in my collection. So the two I don't have are the 2000, I think it was the 2002. It was 2002's Corporate America. And I think it was 2014 or maybe 2012, somewhere in that time period, they put out another album called Love, Hope, and Faith. I can't remember what the name of it was exactly. I don't own either of the last two. The last one I probably will eventually get. The other one I'm not really crazy about. I don't like much about it, and it's hard to find anyway. So, likely, in all likelihood, I'll probably never own those two albums. If I see them in a bin or something like that, yeah, I'll pick them up, but I'm not going out of my way for them. Um, I have the four that I like, really the three that I like. The fourth one I'm not as crazy about either. So I'm going to talk about the albums in kind of a chronological order. It makes most sense to go through them. So their debut album, which is this one, self-titled debut album, came out in 1976. This is considered by many people to be the greatest debut album ever, at least up there among the very best of all time. To some people, maybe it's not that great, but I am not one of those people. So I'm going to put my glasses on. So this album, like I said, came out in 1976, a debut album, recorded at his studio in his house, and then released through the record label, which I always forget what the record label is with these guys. It's Epic. Is it Epic or Sony? I don't know. Never remember. Anyways, I'm looking here. It doesn't really say. It's funny, that used to be the most common thing you would see is the record label everywhere, but you don't see it as much anymore. Produced by John Boylan and Tom Schmaltz. Boylan, sorry, and Tom Schmaltz. I don't know why I said Boylan. Anyways, this is a good, solid masterpiece for sure. I remember when this came out, the song More Than the Feeling I knew right away and was caught up with it like everybody else, but I've had the album given to me for Christmas, even though it wasn't what I asked for, and I never listened to it for 2 years. I didn't even take it out of the wrap. I was so disappointed. And now the album that I wanted so badly and was so disappointed with this one, I now love this one way more than that one. So, you know how it is when you're a kid, you want what you want and you don't care to look beyond it. And that's the way I was with this. But it turned out to be one of the great albums of all times. Some of the best, their best songs are pretty much all on this album. From top to bottom, this is a near perfect album. There isn't a bad track on here. Some of them maybe much better than others, but still all of them really good. Like 8 or above the whole album. It's a fantastic album. I love the guitar tone on this too. It's it's catchy. It sounds very clean, but at the same time has kind of got a lot of bite to it, right? Just really catchy hooks and riffs throughout this whole thing, and of course the vocals are off the charts. This guy's voice is unbelievable. Just the range on this guy's voice itself is unbelievable. If you haven't owned this album or ever listened to it, I think this is one of those albums. There's probably maybe 24 of them in rock that are absolute have to have albums. If somebody says you can get 24 albums and that's what you're going to have to live with the rest of your life, this has to be one of those albums. That's the way I see it. So the debut album of Boston, with the opening track, More Than a Feeling, which is one of the great rock songs in rock history. Definitely up there, fighting it out with the likes of Stairway to Heaven and Time and those types of songs. Peace of Mind, another really great song. Foreplay, Long Time. The guitar on this is fantastic. The reason I like the song so much is just the heaviness of it. Rock and Roll Band, this is a really good one. Smokin' is really good. Hitch a Ride, maybe my favorite track on the album, or second favorite anyways. Something About You and Let Me Take You Home Tonight. All of them greatly vocaled, and the cover, of course, is fantastic too. I saw this, I thought, oh, maybe I will like this after all, but I just never opened it for the longest time. Anyways, that's their debut album from 76. Their second album out, I actually like the cover almost as much. Boston, Don't Look Back. Came out 2 years later. In 1978, produced by Tom Schmaltz. 8 tracks again. This is a very good album. I do like this kind of science fiction look to it as well. Pretty strong. Almost thought this was going to be a kind of a space rock or prog rock band, but there's none of that going on. Don't Look Back, which is the opening track, is absolutely killer. Takes right off where they left on the last album. I thought this is going to be all as good. It's not quite as good an album. It's still very good though. Used to Be Bad News, Feeling Satisfied, It's Easy. So they did those first 2 albums relatively close to each other, about a year and a half or 2 years apart. Epic. Still on that Epic label here. This particular version of the album is a kind of remastered version of the album from 77. Doesn't have much on it or in it. Very little in here. Very Good Rose on here. Sid Hashin, Fran Sheehan, Brad Delp, and Tom Schmaltz. Schultz, sorry, not Schmaltz. Schultz. I always want to say Schmaltz. I don't know why, but I've done that my whole life. Call it Schmaltz when it's actually Schultz. Yeah, just a brilliant album. Another really strong effort from them. Oh, hello, Stephen. Good morning. Welcome to the Breakfast Show. So we're talking Boston today. So this album, it took me a little bit longer to get into it because, of course, I didn't own it right away when it first came out because I still hadn't even opened the first one yet. But eventually I got it and came to like this quite a bit, actually. And maybe in recent years, I've listened to it a lot more, and it's become my go-to album with this band. Not because I like it more than the debut, I certainly don't, but just because I didn't listen to it as much initially, so it kind of took off for me later. Strong album. And, you know, after this one, most people were thinking, well, this is a band headed for superstardom status, and maybe they did reach that for a brief period, but then there's this big gaps that started happening between their music. Not totally his fault, but definitely affected the music for sure. The third album, much later in time. This is from 1986, so now 8 years have passed. Most people figured, and then especially in that time period where people were putting out albums yearly and sometimes two albums. An 8 year gap is an eternity for a rock band. And I think many people had pretty much been convinced that that was it for this band, that they would not do anymore. They would be a 2 album band and that would be it. And then they put out this third stage, came out in 1986. Had the big hit on it, Amanda, which is a good song. I find this album a little bit more tepid. I don't know, tepid, whatever you want to call it. Maybe not as strong an album as the previous two. In fact, it's definitely not as strong as the previous two. It's not a bad album by any stretch, though. This was recorded at his Hideaway Studios. I like the album covers of almost all their albums, even the 2 albums I don't own. I don't think much of, but I still think their album covers are really good. I'm just trying to figure out, is this a different kind of ship? Usually they have the guitar ship. This one doesn't look like a guitar of any kind that I've seen. I don't know. Anyways, it's got 11 tracks on this one, a little bit more than you got on the previous two. Again, on the Epic label or MCA, whatever you want to call it, MCA Records. So this one has a little bit more of a book to it than the previous two as well. There you go. Not much to the book, just basically the lyrics. A little bit of an information part at the back here. Not much, though. It doesn't even tell you who's playing. I don't see it nowhere. How to make a record in just 6 years. Yeah, okay. Pretty funny, eh? Oh, here it does have it. Brad Delp, of course. Tom Schultz, sorry. I keep doing that. Jim Marsden and Gary Pill. I think that's who it was. Yeah, the writing is tiny and I do not see well. Yep, it's a decent album. I have to say it's a decent. I don't mind listening to it once in a while. I don't go to it that often. I find it a little bit too mild for my taste. It's not, we used to do those when I was a kid. We would do those. Yeah, that's what happens, and you see this. You see this on with bands on music. You see it on television. You see it here on the internet or on YouTube, even where people are doing shows regularly, and then they take a gap off, and then they space it out too much, and then they wonder why their ratings and their subscriptions and their views are down. Well, it happens because people don't see you and they forget about you, and people forget that they come on these type of things or they listen to this type of music because it fills a gap in their life. And if you don't fill the gap, they have to still fill the gap themselves. So they go out and they find something else to do. That's just the way it is. Anyways, this is a pretty solid album. It was owned by Xavier before, as you can see. He wrote his name here. Yeah, a good solid album. But the gap between the 2 albums, I think, hurt this album for sure. I think you're right. 6 or 8 years is a gap too long for fans. They move on. So that's what I did. After the first 2, I moved on and forgot about them. And I don't think I owned this one for many years. but I don't mind it. It's a pretty decent album. If it had come out 2 years after their previous album or a year after their previous album, I think it would have done better, because I think it has enough. There's enough here that it would have done better. But because it's so long and if people have moved on to different stuff, the sound on this album isn't completely different from their first two albums. Maybe a little pastoraler, or maybe a little bit softer, maybe not as hard, um, but it was still the sound of the 70s, and this was now the 80s. So Boston's third album, called Third Stage. This one, of course, has Amanda on it. That's their big hit off of the album. Still making hits, though. Still could do that. The rest of the stuff is kind of decent enough, but not terribly memorable. Welcome, Vaughn, to the show. Glad to have you aboard. We're discussing Boston. I'm just going over their discography that I actually own. I do not own the final two, but I do own the first four. And we're just up to Third Stage, which is the third album released 8 years after the previous album in 1986. So we're going to go on to the next album up, which is the last one that I bought, and much later in time again. This one, I believe, from 94, so another 8-year gap. It's tough to recover from an 8-year gap and then do another 8-year gap. Doesn't really help your cause. So this one again, produced by Tom Scholz, 1994. 10 tracks in total on here. This is actually not a bad album. The cover is pretty decent too. I like the cover. I like the cover of all their albums, but this one I like. This one's a little bit more memorable than its predecessor as far as the cover goes anyways. The music here isn't bad. There's a couple of songs on here where they seem to be just like repeating themselves a bit. So, but on the whole, they've got that stage rocket here that you got on Third Stage. This ship is showing on their disc. I never understood why they did that. Is it supposed to be some kind of synthesizer? It's hard to tell from that angle. Yeah, you're probably right. So appearing on this album, you got Fran Cosmo, David Sykes, and Tommy Funderburk on vocals. I know Fran, but the other two I'm not familiar with. Organ, piano, cavalette, keyboards and strings, all by Tom. Lead guitar as well, and rhythm guitar, and Gary Pill on that as well. You got bass guitar, again, Tom Schmaltz and David Sykes, and then drums, again, Tom Schmaltz and Doug Hoffman. So he did most of his own stuff. I often think of Tom Scholz as being a producer more than I think of him being a rock star. He doesn't even really look the rock star part when you see him. Looks kind of weird out there, a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, he's a great guitar player, no doubt about that. I like his ability to come up with these real catchy hooks and riffs. That's, to me, what his strength is. But it's not a great album, this one. It's passable. That's a good term to give this album, passable. Would it have done better if they had just come back again after an 8-year gap, had come back right away and done another album? Probably would have done better. But again, that seems to be their Achilles heel, the lack of production between albums. The next couple of albums are even bigger gaps. I think the next one, the next one's actually an 8-year gap too, and then there's like a 12-year gap. And now there's been like 15 years since that one, so, or maybe not quite that many years, but pretty close to it. And nothing. I doubt we're going to get any more from them. Their time has passed, unfortunately, but they did come out with two very good, they came out with one brilliant album and one very kind of really good album, and then a couple of decent albums after that too. And of course, their artwork is among the better albums for most bands. See, when this band first came out as well, I kind of my kind of feeling about them was they're a kind of a polished band. That's the way I always think of them, as they're a hard rock but polished band. They certainly weren't raw like Aerosmith or Kiss or any bands like that. Very clean sounding band. Something akin to the production that you get nowadays. Probably way ahead of their time in that regard. But masters of hooks. He was a master of hooks and clean production sounds. I don't think you'll have any kind of bad sounds on any of their albums. Just the gap. That's pretty much it. Yeah, Aerosmith rock. There's no two ways about it. But they definitely don't sound anything like Boston. That's for sure. So to me, Boston, really solid hard rock band. Definitely fits in with all the other hard rock bands, but much more polished sound, production wise, very clean. No raw edges anywhere. Even the distorted guitar solos and stuff like that sound polished. They sound like polished guitar solos. But you can't take away from the quality of hooks. I think part of the thing that for me, for Boston, that really stands out is the vocals. The vocals are off the charts. This guy is among the very best vocalists out there. I didn't necessarily think that way when I first heard them, though, because my intake and my income with rock music was with BTO and Kiss. Those were my first two bands, and they are anything but smooth sounding vocalists. Very raw sounding stuff. Even Aerosmith with that raw sounding vocals. I prefer that type of vocal. Doesn't sound so polished, but this guy has an exceptional quality to the sound of his voice, and his range is beyond the grasp of, I would say, 95% of the vocalists out there could not do the vocal. You can't fake that shit, man. He just is. Unfortunately, he's gone, because I probably should have added him into my recent episode of questions. I actually considered him. I had about 10 or 12 people on there that I had considered, but decided on the 10 that I picked. But he was definitely on that list of people that. It wasn't that he passed too soon either. That was probably the reason why I didn't choose him ultimately, because he passed in his 50s. If he'd passed in his 30s or 40s, I might have considered it. Would have liked to have seen more stuff by him, but you know how it is. Sometimes that doesn't happen. So those are the albums by Boston. Boston's debut from 1976. Boston's second album, Don't Look Back, from 1978. Their third album, called Third Stage, from 1986. Their fourth album, this is called Walk On, and it came out in 94. And then the other two albums, which I don't own, I believe the Corporate America was 2002. The last one, which even the title I'm kind of vague on, I think it's called Love, Hope, and Faith, or something like that. Something to that effect, which came out in 2013. I guess I could look it up. Let's look it up. Might as well be accurate, right? Let's try it. See what happens. My other computer has been having issues. It's not responding to my responses sometimes. I think the pad is worn. What am I doing here? We're just going to look up this last album, because It's the one that I've actually never actually even heard this album. At least the Corporate America I've heard. I've listened to it before. This one I have not. Many people tell me it's the better of those two albums. So with me, Boston also has a trajectory that they've been consistent with. Each of their subsequent album isn't quite as good or less than as good as its predecessor. And that's continued right up to Corporate America. But I think the other one, it's called Life, Love, and Hope. I wasn't sure what the title was. This album from 2013, so 11 years past Corporate America, which was 8 years. So there was an 8-year gap between the second and third, between the third and fourth, between the fourth and fifth albums. So that's 24 years between 3 albums. Where this one was a big gap of this was the big gap of 11 years between, and then that was in 2013. It's now been 13 years. So if they were to put another one out, it would definitely be an even bigger gap than the predecessor. But you know what? I don't want to harp too much on that. It's old news. Everybody already knows that they're considered hard rock, pop rock, and arena rock. And I wouldn't call them a pop. Yeah, I guess you'd have to with the song like Amanda. I don't see how you couldn't. To me, Amanda is more of a ballad than it is a pop rock song. But you call it whatever you want. So those last 2 albums, of course, were on different labels as well. I think he had a fight with the record label for the 5th one, which not really all that surprising. Seems how a lot of this large gap stuff was based on contract disputes and lawsuits with record labels. So yeah, so that 5th one was on. I can't remember the label for that, but the Frontiers was the final one. I know that. So after he broke away from the 5th, or the label that he was on for the 5th album, he then got on to it's almost a decade later, he was on the Frontier label, and album didn't do that great either. And I think it's a better album though. From what I've been told, it's a better album. It sounds more like Boston than the predecessor. I think he didn't even use real drums on the 5th album. I think that was basically drum synthesizers and drum beat and that kind of stuff. Yeah, really cool artwork on their albums. I think definitely among the best bands for artwork. Now, I don't know if they had a specific artist doing their work. I don't know. It doesn't. I'm going to check on this one because this one seems to have the most information, but see if it says anything about the artwork. Oh, art by Vartan. Design and back cover illustration by Ron Larson. Cover art conceived by Andy Engel. Cover illustration by Michael Bryan. So there's a bunch of people. I wonder if it's the same as on the first album. I want to see if they just keep changing, just a different artist in each case. It's pretty consistent artwork though, so I'm thinking that there has to be some continuity there. I like this picture too. How to Make Extra Money Working from Home by Tom Schmaltz. That's funny. Okay, let's see what they say here, if it tells you anything about the artwork. Cover illustration, Roger Heisen. Yeah, no, totally different artists between the albums. So pretty consistent though. So I'm assuming they had huge input in the cover of their albums, since they all are fairly similar in artwork, but you have a bunch of different people doing the artwork, at least on the 2 I looked at. I guess probably the same on the other ones too. Yes, a lot of bands, once they find an artist who does the kind of covers they like, they tend to go back to them You see this Genesis had that run of 3 albums, Trespass through Foxtrot, all with the same artist. You've got Judas Priest has an artist they've used for a lot of years. Iron Maiden, of course. Yeah, just that. And, Yes is probably one of the most famous for that, having Roger Dean as their artist and consistently using him. Although they did have a period of time where they put out some pretty lame art. And I'm not sure why they even thought that was a good idea. Anyway, well, maybe they were trying to break an image too. Maybe they wanted a more pop image to their music than they did in the 80s than they did with the later and earlier albums. And it's kind of the same with bands, so to me, if you're putting out an album and you're going through all that hard work to put together an album that you think people are going to actually love and want to buy, the artwork on the cover is critical. Because a lot of people, if they see an album, if they're looking, maybe not so much now because everybody just streams everything, but if you go into a store and you see an album or you see a cover, even on the internet, and the cover, you're passing through albums that you're looking at, see which ones you want to buy, and you see one with an amazing cover, and metal bands are big on this, very big. They go to the extreme with getting the best covers, which, people see an album cover and they say, wow, that looks great. And that's what interests them, gets them started. But if you just got some bland, useless cover on your thing, it doesn't help your cause at all. Yeah, you're right about that. Everybody pretty much, I can't even think of any bands that were in the 70s that marched into the 80s that didn't really get that pop bug. I can't think of anybody offhand. Maybe some of the metal bands, Judas Priest maybe, but even they became a little more commercial in the 80s. Black Sabbath maybe too. They were heavy and very different in the 70s. Their music was very different in the 80s, but I don't know that it became more commercialized. Maybe you might call it more commercialized. I don't think of their 1984 Born Again album as being commercial at all. But for the most part, yes, there's very few bands that didn't soften it up a lot, including my favorite band, Rush, who many people say were one of the worst at it. Them and Genesis, and yes, all three of them. Yeah, in some cases they became more heavy. But some bands were poppy in the 70s and just became more poppy in the 80s, And I don't mind pop music, but most pop albums for me, as soon as you might have an initial real like of their music because it's catchy and it's got some hooks that bring you in, but it tends to burn out quickly. I kind of think of it as a O-class star, It's born, lives, and dies in a brief period. It's not like these small red dwarfs that last for trillions of years, which is the classic albums, I guess, if you're doing the analogy to the fullest. I prefer, well, at least in the 70s, I preferred more bitey type music, more hard rock. Maybe not to the extreme that some of the metal has gone now, but definitely I do like harder rock than I do poppier rock, except for when it comes to psychedelic space rock or prog rock, which I tend to like some of the more pastoral stuff in that, but generally speaking, though, I like it harder. Yeah, I would say that if I was ranking my genres, I would think that probably prog would be easily at the top, and then hard rock would be next. Then maybe metal, psychedelic rock, that kind of stuff, maybe a little bit further down. The pop music, probably, I still like it, but it would be near the bottom. The only type of music that I've never really been able to digest that's played quite a bit on rock channels like this one is that jazz or jazz fusion. I've never really. Uh, to me, they say that prog and jazz fusion have a lot of similarities, and there may be some similarities, but there's a point where it's prog that I really love, and then when it starts to add the jazz fusion to it, I like a little bit of that, but once it gets too much jazz fusion, it just loses me. Yeah, a lot of people like the blues rock too, but it's the same type of story for me that I just initialized with the prog versus the jazz fusion. Same thing with hard rock versus blues rock. I like hard rock, but I don't want it so hard that it's on the metal edge, and I don't want it so bluesy that I don't mind heavy blues hard rock, but once it just becomes a little too bluesy, it loses me a bit too. Sorry. So yeah, and most of these genres are not pure in their straightest sense. There may be some bands that are very pure one way or the other, but most part it tends to be influences from other genres all over the place. Same as psychedelic. I like pure psychedelic music a lot, but some bands go a little too poppy and then it loses some of that edge, or they become too bluesy and it loses some of the edge on another angle, right? So, or I do like psychedelic that kind of goes into a prog element as well. I do like that kind of thing. Pink Floyd. That's why I think Pink Floyd was such a hugely popular band, was because it had stuff in their music that appealed to just about everybody, including the mainstream people who like them as well. You know, most mainstream people who like mainstream music want nothing to do with prog, but they will accept Floyd because they say Floyd is not a prog band. But I beg to differ. I think Pink Floyd's a little bit of a lot of stuff. Yeah, so for me, Boston hard rock band, polished hard rock band, art rock band, definitely all those things. Maybe a little bit on the poppy side as well. Definitely has that pop influence on their music. If I was going to put them into a category, though, if I was stacked, when and a good example of this is, yes, you're true. That's true. A lot of British bands expanded their music in all kinds of directions, to be honest. But usually, when I'm doing at the end of the month, when I do my new albums purchased or album hauls show, I like to give them in their category. So when I'm stacking, like my CDs for the review, I will do the progressive rock and then space rock and then psychedelic rock and then metal and hard rock, and I go down the line. I always, if I get any Boston, I always stack them in the hard rock stack, even though they do have a bit of pop and a bit of arena rock sound to them too. It's the same with Styx. Styx is a band who I think is somewhat similar to Boston in some ways. They do have that polished, clean sound, and they're a hard rock band. I always pile them in the hard rock stack, even though a lot of people would say that Styx is a progressive rock band, and they definitely have that progressive element. They had a period in their history where they were very progressive, and then another period where they were very poppy, and they've had periods where they were hard rock. They've had periods where they were even ballad like, and now they've kind of gone to the back to the more hard rock, progressive rock sound of their mid to late '70s sound. So Boston, but the good thing about Boston, when you hear a song of them that comes on the radio, or you're somewhere and they're playing a song, maybe you don't recognize the song right away, but you know it's Boston right away. So that is my take on my Boston collection. I probably will do a Boston album ranking at some point, probably not too far in the future. I've put it off basically because I was thinking I'll wait to see if I get the other two, but I know enough. To be honest, I'm just waiting to see. I'd like to listen to the last one first before I condemn it to last place. Yeah, I'd like to get a little bit more familiar with it so that I give it a fair shake. As for the corporate America, yeah, like I said, if I seen it in a box for a couple of bucks, I'd probably grab it. But I'm definitely not going to pay a ton of money for that album because I've already listened to it. I don't think much of it, to be honest with you. It doesn't really remind me of Boston too much either. So, anyways, those are my take on the Boston albums today. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. Please hit the like and subscribe. That helps my channel. And also, if you want to be notified of the videos before they come out, especially with the live ones, you can hit the notification bell on that one. And we will be back next week. I'm not quite sure what I wanted to do. I've been thinking about this. I'd like to do something. I don't think I want to do a hard rock band again, but I'm not sure where I want to go with this. I was thinking about maybe doing a Simon and Garfunkel, but I've done some stuff with them recently, so I'm thinking maybe I'll try something else. The one thing I won't do is progressive rock because I do that on Into the Progverse. So, but all the other stuff is kind of open to that kind of thing. Now, I did purchase this Electric Prunes box set last time I did it, and I've listened to the whole thing. So I'm thinking maybe it might be a good thing to maybe try to do some psychedelic for the show next week. Anyways, anybody's got any suggestions, you can put those in the comment section below, and I'll give it a whirl. Let's put it that way. Anyways, thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it. So have yourself a good rest of the Sunday. It's a little bit cold out there, at least where I am in Upper Canada here. So we will see you all next week on the Saturday morning breakfast here on Live. Take care. Bye.